especially here in Canada. We've seen it with Atwood and Galloway and a number of, and Peterson certainly. Yeah, I mean, it's quite terrible what she's endured. And look, we expect reactionary conservatives to be sexist and, stereotypically they're often vile to women. This is progressive doing this. And it's completely discredited the progressive movement in my view, because it's shown them to be complete hypocrites. They've gone from Me Too to Who Cares on that issue, protecting women in the blink of an eye. And to me, it's extremely unprincipled. So I'm with James on this issue.
And you know what? It's interesting because Locke probably agrees with me on this part of it too. Is that there's a zero-sum effort when you're a white man who's not gay, and you're talking about whether or not people go too far, right? And so I've always taken, and I've been of the opinion that I can't comment on someone's experience, right? So if I said all trans people should think this, or all black people shouldn't be upset about this, or if I go into a conversation about these kinds of topics, I shut down. Because I don't want to have to deal with, but the thing is, I don't want to have to deal with any part of what comes back from the crazies. That's the first part. And the second part is, and maybe this is the justification that I tell people, and why I tell people I don't get into these conversations or don't write about these topics, because I don't have those experiences. I'm not a black man. I'm not a trans person. I can't speak to the journey that they're on or what they've gone through. So I understand the metrics of what you're talking about. And I would agree with you, but I don't think that you can say in this day and age, specifically in media, when you're disseminating information and you're trying to have some kind of intellectual opinion on the goings on of the day, specifically when it comes to these topics, I don't feel like a 48-year-old white dude's entitled to talk about it with any kind of empathy at all.
Right, but I'm somewhat surprised to hear you say that, because I know that conservatives, for many years, men were told you're not allowed to have an opinion on abortion because you're never going to have a child. And I think probably a lot of people would reject that and say, look, abortion is a moral issue, and even if you're a man, you don't have a direct biological stake in the game, but you're allowed to have an opinion on this. In the case of some of this gender stuff, it doesn't just affect people in transgender community. It affects, in the case of whether biological males are admitted to women's prison or sports, it affects, everybody who's the father or mother of an athlete. In terms of prisons, it disproportionately affects Indigenous women, who are vastly overrepresented in our prison system. But because these people aren't on Twitter and don't use hashtags, and don't run trendy media outlets, their voice is often ignored. It's also, everyone here on this conversation, to some extent, we're like amateur media critics. And so you can see when fair play or an absence of fair play is exhibited on a given issue. One thing that's amazing about this issue we're talking about, and we're seeing this with the reaction to Caitlyn Jenner and what she said, is that even trans people now are getting canceled if they say the wrong thing about trans issues. So even assuming what you said is 100% right, that if you're not in group X, you shouldn't talk about group X, you have people in group X, where X is the transgender community, who, if what they say is ideologically non-compliant, they're vilified. And that to me is something that we can, even as straight white men, we can point out, that's crazy. That this is not the kind of media or ideological or social media environment we want to be in, where everyone is insisting on this rigorous adherence to state-of-the-art ideological conformity.
And even when you're talking, a lot of social activism is like that. I have a friend who is, I wouldn't say he's a conservative black dude, but he's certainly not really far left leaning. I would call him a moderate, I guess. And he's like, there's no room. He's like, the only black voices that especially activists want to hear are far, far left, often Marxist voices. They don't want to hear from black conservative voices or moderate voices.
And you'll get white people attacking them. You'll get white people saying, you've lost your black card. Like there's in Portland, the craziest scenes out of Portland was when you'd have some white guy screaming at a black police officer doing his job and saying, you're a sellout to black people.
It was a woman, actually. I remember that clip.
Well, there's a few
Yeah.
clips. I mean, you saw this in other cities where like these privileged white people were screaming at some working class cop who happened to be black or Asian or whatever, and like lecturing them about like, you know, that you're a sellout to your race. Like, who the fuck are you? And but this has become common, that like the idea that there's an authentic ideological point of view you should have based on your skin color.